So because there's the mimer that is on Devarim in the Kutei Torah we've already learned. And we even learned the continuation from previous years. So I was looking this morning for something else to learn. And look for other mimer from Devarim. There's not very much that the Alter Rebbe said on Devarim. In general. Everything is focused on teshuvah. Everything is related to teshuvah in some way, or maybe on teshuvah, but almost nothing on Devarim itself. So I decided that we'd learn from. There's a collection of his shorter writings, not always shorter though. Sometimes they're even longer, on different sayings of the sages. And so it's called the Shal Ma'amrei Razal. It's like on the Shas, Zohar, and davening. So this one is on Rosh Hashanah Daled Amud Aleph, and there it discusses how, in the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, it discusses how you count the years of kings, and do you count them starting from the month of Nisan, or do you count them starting from the month of Tishrei? So the end is that by the Jewish kings you start from Nisan, and by non-Jewish kings you start from Tishrei. So then it discusses Cyrus, Koresh. And discusses whether his years are counted in the Bible from Tishrei or from Nisan. They come to the conclusion that, surprisingly, he's counted from Nisan. Cyrus wasn't Jewish, for sure. No, his name wasn't Koresh. His name was Dariavish. Okay. So, Darius. Okay. What's the difference between Koresh and in English you don't hear it, but in Hebrew or in the Semitic languages you hear it a lot more. That they're very much related, these two names. Okay. But still, the strongest thing is that in Gematria they have the same value. Koresh is equal to Dariavish. So it's almost like in some sense that all the Persian kings were called Koresh, just like all the Egyptian kings were called Pharaoh, and all the Philistine kings were called Avimelech, and everybody had their generic name, right? Like in America you call it Mr. President, or the King, or the Queen, or Mr. Prime Minister. They have this generic name they use. In any case, it's not the question here. The question here is a little bit different. Here the Gemara ends and it says, Hu Koresh, Hu Daryavish, Hu Artaxerxes. He had three names. What were they? Cyrus and Darius. Actually, in English you do hear that they're close. Darius and Cyrus. You can hear that they're close. And Artaxerxes, which is harder to see how it's related, but really Artaxerxes just means a big Koresh, big Koresh. In any case, he has three names. So they say really the reason that they count for him from Nisan is because Melech Kasher Haya, because he was a kosher king. Meaning he was a good man. He was God fearing, and because he was God fearing. Again, like you would say in the end, that's what a king is supposed to do. He's supposed to fear God. And what he's supposed to give to the people is to give a feeling that God rules the world. And he's his emissary. He's the one who represents him. So he did that. And that's why the Alter Rebbe was so against Napoleon, because Napoleon was exactly the opposite. I'm not representing anybody. If anything, God is representing me. And it's the opposite. Complete opposite picture. So now it says, so why is it that they changed his name? No, sorry, it's not about why. They have a question here. So what's going on? Why is it that in some instances he's counted his reign is counted from Nisan, and in some instances it's counted from Tishrei. So the answer is, the Gemara says, is kan kodem shichmitz, kan lachar shichmitz. That Koresh, he started out good, but in the end, he fizzled out. And he went back on his fear of heaven, and he changed his notions. So it's called ichmitz. It's like he went sour. Matkif la Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana asks him, "Umichmitz? Where do we see that he went sour? Where do you see this?" Ve'aktiv. On the contrary, he was the one who not only told the Jewish people they could go back, he gave them license to go back to Israel, even though they had been in exile for 70 years. He gave them license to return. After that, right? Because the Persians had conquered the Babylonians, so now they have the right over all the lands. So they decided to give it back to the Jews. But all the more so, he even gave them sacrifices for the temple. And he quotes from Ezra, "Uma chashachan uvnei torim v'techarin ve'imirin le'alun le'ela kashmaya chanetin melach chemar u'mashach כמאמר כהנא ידי בירושלים להווה מתייהב להם יום ביום דילו שלו." He says the edict he signed was that whatever the priests needed, even if they didn't ask for it, they would receive from Persia for all their needs, for everything that they needed for the temple service. It's in Ezra chapter 6. So where do you see that he soured? On the contrary, look at how much he helps. Amar lo Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi mitunach, meaning from the very verse that you just quoted, you can see that he soured. Why? Because he didn't quote the rest of the verse. The rest of the verse is Dilehon mehakrevin nichochin le'ela kashmaya. That you quoted, that was very good. But he didn't quote the connection. In Koresh, in Cyrus's mind, why did he want the temple service to occur? Umetzalin lechayei malka uvnoi. And they should be praying for the health of the king and his sons. So what do you see? So you see that he doesn't really want to bring these sacrifices in honor of God. He says this is a warranty. This is like a insurance policy. Because I also am afraid of the God of the Jews, whatever their God is. I don't know if you knew. It could be that they were already, dualistic. That they had a God in heaven and a God in the netherworld. I don't know where the Persians were at that time. So whatever it is, I'm doing it as an insurance policy for myself, not because I want to really serve God. So then the Gemara says, how can you say that if somebody brings a sacrifice and says, this is for my benefit also, so that's not good? It's very good. And we learned, says if somebody brings charity, he gives charity to charity, and he says, in this merit, my sons should live, and I should merit the world to come, and so on. He adds, he slaps all these things on the tzedakah that he's giving. So Gemara says, it's said elsewhere in Baba Basra, that this is Kamal Yuta. This is a very good tzedakah, and he's a tzaddik gomer. He's a completely righteous person. So how can you say that he can't say this about the sacrifice? It's the same thing. Lo kashya. So says the Gemara, it's not a question, not a problem. Okay. Why? Kan b'Yisrael, kan b'ovdei kochavi. That by a Jew can say that I bring the tzedakah, and I also want this and this and this and this and this, but a non-Jew can't. Okay. It's very interesting. So usually the way this is understood is that when a Jew says this, what he means is that even if I don't merit these things that I wanted, and because I give charity, thanks to the charity, as a result of the charity that I gave, I still feel that it's charity. I'm not going to ask anybody back for the money. But a non-Jew, we're afraid that he will. And therefore, it's not good. That if he adds any conditions to his good act, the conditions, if they're not fulfilled, he'll want to take back his act, and that we don't want. So we said that. So to begin with, we don't let a non-Jew bring something to the temple or give charity when he slaps conditions on it, because we're not sure that what will happen if the conditions aren't met. And if the conditions are on the tzedakah, meaning I'm giving you charity so that you give it to X, Y, and Z, I want to earmark it. So that you have to fulfill. You have to do what he says. But if he says, I want Hashem to fulfill, I want God to fulfill this, and it doesn't happen, so you're going to get into an argument with him, and you don't want to get into that position. So he said that's not the right way. Don't bring us stuck at that way. That's what the Gemara says, okay? So that's the usual way that it's explained. But now listen to what the Alter Rebbe says. So the Alter Rebbe says, בגמרא ראש השנה דף ג' דף ד' גבי כורש, כאן קודם שהחמיץ וכולי די דהבון מקרבין ניחוחין לאלה כשמיא מצלין לחיי מלכה ובנוי וכשעשס ומן דאביד אחי למעליות ההיא והתניא אומר סלע זו צדקה בשביל שיחיו בניי בשביל שאזכה בה לחיי עולם עבר איזה צדיק גמור ומשני לא קשה, כאן בישראל, כאן באומות. והקשה התוספות. So on the daf there, the Tosfot asks, Mehadetnan beper kama de'avot. We learn in the first chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers. Al tiyu ka'avadim mishamshin et harav al manat lekabel pras. It says there very clearly, you shouldn't do Torah and mitzvos because you want a reward. Doesn't mean that you won't get a reward, but don't do it because of that. So how can you say here that by a Jew it's okay for him to slap conditions on and say, I'm giving the charity? So we answered an answer. The answer we answered is he indeed adds the condition, but he doesn't really mean it. Meaning he's not going to pressure Hashem if it doesn't work out.
It's not a full-blooded condition.
Okay. The Tertzu, the Tosfos says, the Hainu Bomat Olam Shetoina L'Rishonot. And so the answer that we gave, that was the Tosfot's answer. The Tosfot is the one who gives the answer we just said. That the moment that the condition is not met, they don't want the Chatchila, to begin with, they want their charity back. They want their korban back. They want everything back. Because if the condition wasn't met, that's not why I gave. I gave for the condition. Okay. It's hard to understand this, he says. דאם באומות העולם שטוענים לצדקה, אם לא היטיבו לו בגללה, איסור גמור בדבר. כמו שכתוב כאן בקורש דקר להחמיץ. ולא שייך לזה לשון אל תהיו כעבדים, שאמר אנטיגונוס למשמע שהוא רק עצה טובה שמצווה כך לתלמידיו. So how can you say this, he says. Why? Because if it's like you say, that they go back on everything that they did, then it's a complete isser. It's a complete isser to take it from them. But what does this thing from the Ethics of the Fathers say? It's just it's a good advice. It's not halacha. It's not halacha that you can't serve Hashem without with expecting a reward. It's okay if that's what the person wants. If that's what he understands. There's a lot of people that's how they understand things. That's as good as they can get. They understand that I'll do X, Y, and Z while I'm alive, and then God, you'll give me some reward when I die. Or I'll do X, Y, and Z today, and tomorrow you'll give me this and this reward. If you understand that way, what can we do? That's how you understand. It's like a child who's going to school. Why? Because his parents promised him that he finishes the school year, they'll buy him a puzzle. I don't know, whatever, right? Something like that.
אבל זה מפורש, ונתתי ועשיתי וזה,
כן.
והיה עם שמות, זה בסדר.
So we said, it's okay. It's like a child though. What does he understand? He understands that the reason I do this is for the reward. So it's good advice that you should mature. You should get beyond it. And see things a little bit from a more how should I say? A more serious perspective. don't do things in life just because you're paid. Okay? Go do things because they mean something to you. Go do things because they have value. Not everything has to be payment. And if you lead your whole life with everything being just payment, looking for payment, so you're missing out maybe on the best part. So it's good advice. But here in the Gemara here in Rosh Hashanah, it sounds like you're not allowed to take from them. Meaning it's not like okay, maybe if he thinks this way, we don't. You're really not allowed to. So how can the Tosfot say that it's only because we're afraid that they'll come and say we'll want the korban back or we'll want the charity back? That's an inconvenience. That's not something that's forbidden. So just from the question, you already understand that the Alter Rebbe is very insistent on reading the text properly. So if the text says this is, or even implies that this is forbidden, and because of that we say that Korish soured and so on, it's a change of status. So you can't say that it's advice. Like the smart person sees the future and he says, if I let the non-Jew bring something and he won't feel that the conditions were met, he'll want it back and it'll present a big problem for him. And who can ever know whether God repaid him or didn't repay him? That's just an inconvenience. That's just advice. Another Rebbe wants to be something that's completely forbidden. So how do you make that? How do you explain it that way? לכן הנראה לי לעניות דעתי לתרץ הגמרות בעניין אחר. He says, no, you can't understand this whole story the way it is here without the context. There's context to this. והוא בהקדים עניין הנהוג בימי חכמי התלמוד, כנודע מפורסם בש"ס. There was a custom in the time of the Talmud, in the time of Razal, the sages, and it's well known. It's everywhere in the Shas. Everybody knows about it. It's nothing hidden. Okay? שהיו כופין וממשכנין על הצדקה כדין דקופה שהצדקה נגבית בשניים. There was a requirement, an obligation on everyone to pay charity. It was like a tax. It wasn't like if you want to give charity, give. Don't want to give charity, like it is today. No, in the time of the sages also, even after the Beis Hamikdash. Time of the Beis Hamikdash, that was for the Beis Hamikdash. But again, you didn't have to.
Like Maisa? Like Maisa?
It was like a Maisa. שהם שמים כל אחד ואחד כמה ראוי לגבות ממנו, and they were like IRS, and they came to you, and they would see how much income you had, and they take a certain percentage, and they force you to give it. Meaning, if you didn't give this tax, which again was all for charity, if you didn't give this tax, they probably wouldn't get an aliyah in shul. They probably wouldn't let you to have it in shul. Who knows? All kinds of things, all kinds of sanctions. And they would force people. Again, they wouldn't beat them up. They wouldn't put them in jail. There was no jail then. But they had all kinds of social sanctions that they could put on you. כמו שכתוב בגמרא, רבא אקסאיה דרב נחמן ברמי ומתחלקת בשלושה. And just as it says that Rava forced, they were in Bavel, in Babylon, and they forced Rav Nachman bar Ami to give tzedakah. ומתחלקת בשלושה, so two people need to go. You can't. There's no such thing as one IRS agent comes alone. There have to be two people when they come to take it from you, and when they come to distribute it among the poor, there have to be three people who are responsible for the distribution, so that there can't be any nepotism or anything like that. Nepotism, mostly. אך מזה לא היו עושים ונותנים רק דברים ההכרחיים לעניים לחם לאכול ובגד ללבוש בצמצום די סיפוק חיותן. But from this tzedakah, from this charity that was required, obligated by everybody, the collectors of this tzedakah was meant only for the very basic necessities of the poor. So it was for food, it was for clothing, but nothing more than that. כמו כן, לא היו נותנים להם ברך כל כך, כסעודת ההרחבה בבשר. So meat, they wouldn't give them. Okay? If they wanted meat, they had to get it themselves. But this is very much like the social system that we know. You don't make the person rich. You don't bring them to the level where they can buy whatever they want, but you allow them to continue to sustain themselves. So that's what it was meant for. They also didn't give them enough money for important clothing, for honorable clothing. So this obligatory tzedakah was only for what was necessary, the least necessary to sustain them. Because we're not required, there's no obligation that the charity that we give makes somebody live a life of leisure. That much we don't need. So they only would take for the basic necessities. As it says, to give him life. To give him life and not to give him pleasure. And therefore, when it came to giving pleasure, that, meaning, if there was a poor man who needed money for a wedding, so if you wanted to help him and make sure that his wedding was mechubadik, they would have enough chicken, enough meat, whatever for everybody, so you could give him. That's tzedakah. It's considered tzedakah, but you're not obligated to. שככה המצווה שמוכח לקיים, כי קיים זה מה שכתוב בתורה, מצוות צדקה ומה שנתן צורך די סיפוקו, שככה הוא המצווה שמוכח לקיימה. שעל זה כופין ומשכינים. על יותר מזה, אינו מחויב לקיים. More than that, you're not obligated. אם היות כי גם זו מצווה היא באמת, ברצון השם, אבל היא כתוספת על העיקר, ואין מוכח לקיימה, ואין כופין אותו על זה, אם אינו רוצה. אבל עיקר מצווה שהוא לאחיותו מוכח לקיים, ואם אין רוצה, כופין וכו'. So, the first point here is that every mitzvah has a limit. And the limit is, what are you obligated to do? Even though even though it says that, and this ties into what we learned at the end of last week, even though it says that your mitzvahs are very wide, still they're not infinite. Even though they come from the infinite aspect of Hashem. Why? Because that's the whole point. That from the infinite came the finite. So there's a limit to every mitzvah. Okay. The moment that it comes into this world, it has limits like everything in this world. So you have to learn halacha. You have to know what the limits of every mitzvah is. For instance, a person says, I want to put tefillin on all day. So, very nice. Can you go into the bathroom with him? No, you can't. But imagine somebody who doesn't know that. Or the opposite. What's the opposite? The opposite is when somebody says, when I was in college in the first year, so I went to the gym and I had my tzitzis on, and I had my tzitzis over my t-shirt. Okay? Not like what we talked about on Shabbos. So there was a Jewish guy there who knew enough to know what a tzitzis is. So he had enough tact. He thought he was saying something smart. He took me to the side and he tells me, it's not very honorable that you wear the tzitzis in the gym. Because what was he thinking? He was thinking, what I mean, tzitzis is a holy object. It's a holy relic. How can you wear it where you're sweating? So I explained to him that tzitzis is something that you wear all the time, even at night. And there's no difference. And even in the bathroom, there's no difference. Why? Because the mitzvah there is different. The level of the holiness of the fringes is different than the holiness, for instance, of tefillin. It's a different level. But more importantly, the halacha tells you that because it says that you should see it at all times, from that we learn that you wear it all the time. You don't need to wear it at night. It's true. You don't have to wear it at night, but you're allowed to wear it at night.
How did the goyim react to wearing tzitzis in the gym?
Could care less. They look at it the same way they look at a Sikh's hair and headband and whatever. America's a place of weirdos. They call them weird Nobody's so impressed. Anyway, Okay, so God willing, tomorrow we'll see what He does with this. So this is the first thing, that mitzvahs have limits. And you have to learn halacha in order to understand these limits.
But the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that even though it says you don't have to give away 10% or 20% or more than that, for certain things, you can give away much more.
But you have to know what the limit is, what the minimum limit is. And that's going to become very important for the rest of this mimer. Okay? It's not very long. I think we'll finish it tomorrow, the day after. But it gives a very, because I said I wanted to focus more on mitzvahs, that it gives a very important basis for how we should conduct ourselves when doing mitzvot. Okay.
In awe and fear and trepidation.